Hi. So similarly to when I first started this channel, I ran down a segment that I talked about why I might be worth listening to, and I will do the same here as a drug and alcohol expert. So here are the reasons that it might be worthwhile listening to old Dakota about anything that has to do with addiction. Some personal history might be good. I started drinking when I was 10. The period between 10 and say 12 years old, I probably got drunk, I'll just guess at, let's say, 30 times, but at around 12 or 13 is when I started to become something of a weekend binge drinker, I would say. It was in Massachusetts where I was living that we'd go to what was called the package store, might still be called that, or the packy, to ask people to buy us alcohol or beer from outside of the package store. It was about that time that I started to use other drugs. I smoked marijuana about that time, although it was pretty much dirt weed back then. Then at 15 years old, I joined a carnival. We were living in California, and in carnivals, they're big on speed, and so it was mostly what were called white crosses back then, and so I'd take a lot of white crosses. By then I was also smoking cigarettes, so then by the time I was 17, I joined the Army, and when I went over to Europe and was really pretty rotten soldier, so we don't need any of that. Thanks for your service for this guy, because yeah, it just doesn't, it's not appropriate. But in any case, there was involvement with hash. I used to deal in 100-gram plates, so big old plates of hash. I would black market cigarettes off post to this old lady we all just called Grandma, and she would sell me these pills called Mandrix, which if anybody out there remembers Quaaludes, they were like the potency of a Quaalude, but even stronger. And what they would do is they just destroy the central nervous system as far as coordination and inebriation. And if you had a Mandrix and a beer, it was not like having two of anything. It was an exponential experience of inebriation. People used to say, or we as soldiers used to say, that we'd be bouncing off the walls, because I mean it would just, like I said, destroy coordination. And there was a bout of heroin at that time that was fairly short-lived. I mean, it was probably like 4 or 5 months that I was messing with heroin that I realized that all of my friends were now junkies, or my friends were like shifting into the realm of junkies, and there was at least enough sense in me back then to think to myself, well, is this really a path I want to go down? Decided not, but you know, there was certainly meth, or back then crank, when it showed up. Oh yeah, and an interesting little tidbit about the Mandrix is when I was probably 18, late 18, around there, I had brought a jar of 100 of these things on post and distributed them, and I was at an air show that they did every year at the Fliegerhorst Kaserne, and people were giving me mandrakes just when they saw me, just as a gratuity for me selling them to them or whatever. And I don't know how many exactly I had, but I had built up a tolerance. So when I say that I probably had 4 or 5 and an equal amount of beers, which for a regular person probably would have killed them, it tried to kill me. As a matter of fact, the explanation that I got from people was that I was standing there talking and then just started weaving back and forth, and then without putting my hands out, I fell flat backwards and bounced off of the pavement. So fortunately, being a air show and everything, I was surrounded by EMTs, and they kept me artificially respirated on the way to the hospital. Apparently, according to the male nurse that I spoke to later, said that I stopped breathing on the way to the hospital. And apparently, after they got my stomach pumped, they decided that, this one guy decided that he was tired trying to slap me into consciousness, and so I awakened with him. He had my hand like this, hit me in the face, and so I awakened to that, and my company commander, who we had a very serious hate relationship, standing there telling me, you really effed up this time, Baker. Well, yeah. Anyway, I went back to the barracks, and with the exception of getting up to go to the bathroom on whatever occasion that woke me up, I slept for pretty close to 3 days solid. So that almost took me. In any case, when I got out of the Army, as I've said before, I felt as though the biker life was the life for me, and so including staying at hanging out at biker bars on a regular basis and drinking pretty much nightly. There was a whole lot of meth that was involved in that period, well, I say that period lasted for about a decade. But so, by the time I got sober at 38, I, went through this pretty much 28-year period where I would do whatever was put in front of me and happily do it till it was gone and try to go find some more. So along that route, I accrued 6 DUIs, and that's really not that bad when you consider I probably drove drunk hundreds of times. Then when I got sober, and I've talked about this before, I got the guidance to be a drug and alcohol counselor. So I did that at a facility here in Minnesota called Recovery Resource Center for nearly a decade. I was a drug and alcohol counselor. All the while, then I started to work on my master's degree, and I did my final paper, which is at the St. Mary's University, called the integration paper, but what other people might call a thesis, was on the neurochemistry of addiction. So I know a little bit about it, and I also wrote an article. Again, you can find this in my website. Again, I will try to remember to provide a link for this. That's called What You Need to Know About Addiction. And this was, I should say, valuable enough to end up front page on a recovery magazine. And so I got that going for me. Well, you got that going for you through me, because the point is that I am going to offer what it is that I can to help a person who is perhaps thinking about recovery, thinking about abstinence, thinking about trying to reduce their use. And yeah, I'll start that process here pretty soon as well. So, thanks for listening. Bye.